Welcome. Today we're going to take a look at narrative genres. We're going to look at what they are and how writers can use them. We'll also take a look at some examples for a variety of different genres. Let's take a look at just what genre is. So genre is just a category. So it's a category for stories that have similar characteristics. That's all it is. And the similar characteristics that we tend to see between these stories have to do with the tone of the stories, the style of the stories, as well as the elements of fiction, such as the setting that's used, the characters, or the types of characters, the types of themes, things like that. That's what you're going to see in genres. Let's take a look at some examples that can make it a little bit easier too, and also look at how do writers use genres. So when a reader chooses to read a particular story that's in a specific genre, they have expectations of what's going to happen in that story, the types of characters that they're going to run into in that story, the kinds of themes that they're going to run across, and things like that. So having your stories written in particular genres can make that communication process between the writer and the reader much easier for both the writer and the reader, because the writer knows what genre that they're writing in, the reader knows what genre that the piece is, and that can help the writer to appease the reader by meeting their expectations in their stories. Let's take a look at some examples here. So there are a variety of different children's genres, of course, and these are typically broken up into two different broader categories. So one's going to be instructional. In instructional, you have stories that are still fictional stories, but the writers are writing those fictional stories for the purpose of teaching kids a lesson, a moral, or a process, something like this. So it might be something like be nice to people, or hold hands when crossing the street, or things like this. The other elements that you're going to see in children's genres is going to be for the purpose of entertainment. So some writers are creating stories solely to entertain kids. Sometimes they're also thinking about how they can entertain children and their adults together. So you'll see too stories that have elements for attracting the kids, but also being interesting to adults, so that adults don't get bored or disinterested while reading those stories with their kids. Some examples of these are going to be the Harry Potter series. That's entertainment. There's lots of wonderful entertainment in that Harry Potter series. And sure, there are some instructional elements too. Some great themes about being nice to people and being open and thoughtful and standing up for good and things like that. But really, those stories are entertaining. If you look at folk and fairy tales, particularly folk tales from around the world that are specifically for children, you'll find that a lot of those are instructional. They include themes and lessons for kids to keep kids safe and to teach kids about how this particular group of people operates, how they stay safe, how they raise their children, what their values are, and things like that. You'll oftentimes see those coming across in folk tales. All right, speculative fiction. Speculative fiction is a large umbrella, and underneath of that, you're going to have any kind of story that isn't necessarily real, like real in the physical sense. So science fiction, fantasy, dystopian, these are three different types of genres that fit under that larger umbrella of speculative fiction. And some examples: under science fiction, that would be Dune. Fantasy, that would be The Hobbit. And for dystopian, that would be 1984. So with science fiction, if you're picking up a science fiction story, you might find things that are where things are happening in outer space, where things are happening in the future, where there are a variety of different types of species, such as aliens, that are included in those stories. There may be some fantastical things that are connected to science that are happening there. With fantasy, you may have fairies, you may have elves, you may have other kinds of fictional worlds. There may be connections to mythology within fantasy stories as well. And with dystopian, you oftentimes see stories that are written about society's breakdown. So when people are not getting along in the same way that they are today, so things are kind of falling apart. Oftentimes dystopian stories are warning stories of, hey, let's keep it together so that things don't get worse, or something to that effect. An example story of that would be 1984. Okay, another type of genre is suspense, and underneath of suspense, we're going to see these different types of subgenres here. So we've got suspense, of course, thrillers, mysteries, crime stories, murders or whodunits, and we've got a variety of different examples here. So anything that kind of gets your blood pumping, right? Those kind of stories where you don't have all of the information as the reader up front. You are finding out what's going along as the characters are finding out what's happening. Oftentimes you have some sort of criminal intent or criminal behavior that's happening. There's usually a clear kind of good character and bad character in terms of those who are following the law or following the moral codes of the society. So examples of books that would fall under that suspense genre: everything by Agatha Christie. Those are all mysteries, murders, whodunits. Going to have a lot of crime going on in there and a lot of good suspense happening. Everything by Stephen King, you're getting that horror. Horror definitely falls under suspense, of where you want to find out if the characters are going to make it at the as they go through the story, who's going to survive and that sort of thing. Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, that's a more contemporary book. We Have Always Lived in the Castle. That's from the mid-20th century. And then some more contemporary pieces here: My Sister, the Serial Killer, and When No One Is Watching. So again, suspense is that broad umbrella of the genre, and then underneath of that you're going to have all of these genres that they may cross over a bit. So you may find that there are some stories that have aspects of mystery, crime, and thriller all mixed up into the same story, which is very typical. All right, with history and historical fiction, you can have actual historical fiction which sticks to the real history of what did happen, and you can also have altered history of where the history has been changed. Steampunk is a subgenre of altered history, of where they take events or people from history and then they change what really happened. So instead of the United States going through the Civil War, it might be that the Civil War never happened and different events happened instead. Or maybe after World War II. I've seen a story where Stalin ended up becoming, continued on. He lived for many decades afterward, and he ended up becoming kind of like an evil super monster type of creature. So you can change history with altered history stories, and then you can have historical fiction too. Some examples of historical fiction stories are The Help, Outlander, that's a whole series there. The Scarlet Letter, and classic there by Nathaniel Hawthorne. The Personal Librarian, and The Davenports. So you can see how historical fiction stories can be varied. They don't have to be just the same kind of thing. Romance, if you don't know, romance is actually one of the best-selling and most popular of fiction genres. Here you have love stories. There is kind of a formula to many romance novels, and some readers absolutely love that. They love that idea of the formula and having that sense of consistency between the stories. Some examples of romance stories are Red, White, and Royal Blue. That's a popular one that I see in the store a lot. Vision in White, The Proposal, The Wedding Date. You kind of see a theme, too, in those titles of where you get that sense of love and romance and courtship and so forth within the titles, too. And Western. So with Western, Westerns are mostly a 20th century genre. So anything that's by Louis L'Amour, a couple of specific books here that are very popular in the 20th century: Riders of the Purple Sage, Shane, and Little Big Man. So here we have very strong characters. They fit within particular professions. So you're going to have cowboys, you're going to have sheriffs, you're going to have outlaws, and so forth. These are going to be strong characters. It's going to be a strong character that's in a harsh climate. So oftentimes you have the setting takes a very important role within Westerns. Clear kind of good guy, bad guy types of stories that are going on. And these actually, if you really look at the structure of Westerns, these harken back to mythological stories, particularly those connected to the idea of sun gods, who are the leaders of the community, who are keeping the evil away and that sort of thing. So lots of interesting things in Westerns, and Still a popular genre after all these decades. And then another, our final one here is the realistic or literary fiction. So here we've got realistic stories about realistic characters in realistic places. So here we have stories of things that could happen or did happen or very similar to things that are happening. Some examples here, we've got a couple of contemporary pieces as well as a couple of classics. So The Hate You Give, Pride and Prejudice, Speak, and Les Miserables. So all of these are stories about realistic characters in realistic settings and so forth. This is also where you get that literary fiction of where you get stories that have that strong artistic quality to them. So you've seen a lot of different genres here. You can tap into these genres in different ways within your stories, within your shorter pieces, your short stories, as well as your longer pieces, moving into screenplays and novels, of course. And you can use these different elements, the theme, the setting, the characters, the tone and style, and so forth, to create your stories. And this can create a nice communication pattern back and forth between the writer and the reader. So I hope that's helpful to you. Good luck with your writing.